Alright, my rework of the D&D 2024 Barbarian is complete. This is using the rage mechanic I talk about in the Balance and Symmetry video. There'll be a link to check that out if you haven't. So if you're just here for that, there's a link down below to download the rework. Go ahead and check it out. But if you want to stick around, I'm going to go through my design philosophies and the logic behind some of these changes, as well as discuss where you could go with this rework yourself in your home game. And toward the end, I will go over a new subclass I designed specifically with this new rage mechanic in mind. I couldn't help myself, I was just having too much fun. So let's dive in and see what we got with the Advanced Barbarian. For those that don't know, I'm Peter. I'm the creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, which is a series of action horror tabletop role-playing games that have a very cool injury system. You can check out my other videos to see more on that. So these Dungeons & Dragons topics aren't really the focus of this channel or Tales from Elsewhere, but I find D&D to be a great case study for looking into tabletop design ideas, and mainly because most people are familiar with it at this point. So this Barbarian rework is not the kind of thing you'll see frequently on this channel, but it was a lot of fun and I hope you all enjoy it. Alright, so let's dig in here and get into the nitty-gritty of this rework. So before I start showing all of the numbers and mechanics here, this is just a high-level note that this is unplay-tested material. I've checked it out and done some rolls and tried to imagine how it would play, but this is very much a rough draft of this rebuild. So if you're going to try this in your home game, definitely work with your group and fiddle with the numbers a little bit, and you're going to need to maybe tweak it as you go. Particularly if you allow multi-classing at your table, this is not going to be balanced around multi-classing, so probably don't allow people to take a one-level dip. If I were to spend more time on this project, I would distribute some of the power that you get in the first 3 levels across maybe the first 4 levels. But that's neither here nor there. That's outside of the scope of this kind of for fun thought experiment rebuild. So word of warning, untested, tweak the numbers at your table as you see fit. So the core of this rework is changing how rage functions. So in D&D 5th edition and 5.5, you use a bonus action to activate rage, sort of like a stance. And while you are raging, you gain a number of passive benefits. So the main thrust of this rebuild is to turn rage into something a little bit more proactive and engaging, and something that the player thinks about turn by turn rather than at the start of the fight. So how does the new rage function? So rage is tracked on a dice. You have a rage die, and I've made that a d6 to start with. The idea is that you can track it with the same die you would use to be rolling your rage abilities. So when the barbarian rolls initiative, they roll their rage die, and that's how much rage they start with in a fight. Pretty simple. So you roll a d6, if you get a 3, you start with 3 rage. There are then a number of ways to gain rage during a fight, and this is an area that I think you and your home game will have to refine and help figure out, as I picked a handful of triggers that I think would come up frequently enough, but not too frequently, to generate more rage throughout a fight. The intention is as the fight gets harder, as things go wrong, the barbarian gets more rage. So as they're taking damage or missing attacks or their allies are going down, the barbarian gets to build up more rage, or they receive a critical hit, right? So the worse the fight is, the more access to rage there will be. Now, rage has a passive benefit to it, and I think this is probably not well balanced at this point. You take less damage from all sources equal to the amount of rage you have. Now, starting at a d6 means that you could be taking 6 less damage from all sources at level 1, which is probably much too much, as that's better than resistance at low levels. But then, as the rage die scales up eventually to a d12, maybe that becomes too weak at higher levels, so the power may be too front-loaded on that system, and it may need to be 1/2 of your rage or something like that. Again, this is untested, so fiddling with the numbers there is going to be key, as this new rage doesn't give you resistance, but rather flat damage reduction. And my logic for that is I like the idea of the barbarian shrugging off small hits. All the little arrows and knife stabs, the barbarian just shrugs them off, right? They aren't phased by that. But it's the big hits that would still register heavily on the barbarian. So that's my logic for switching from resistance to flat damage reduction. And additionally, while you are bloodied, all rage increases from all sources are doubled. So if D&D 5.5 brought back Bloodied, so I thought this would be a cool opportunity to integrate that into the Barbarian. So if they're lower on hit points, right, if they've been taking a beating, they start to generate more and more rage and just go real nuts. And I think that'll be fun feeling. That idea that the Barbarian's the real comeback hero here, that as the fight really devolves, the Barbarian's just going to have this wellspring of this resource to spend and hopefully turn the fight around. Now, apart from giving you this passive damage reduction, the Barbarian can unleash their rage to gain various effects, and you start with 2 of them at level 1. Again, maybe this needs to be distributed across the first 3 levels, one of which is a Furious Strike. It's kind of like a smite, where if you hit something, you can expend rage to deal extra damage, and the other is spending a bonus action to roll your rage die and gain some temporary hit points. And the thought is that you would get to pick between this passive damage reduction, letting your rage build and being harder to hurt, or expending them for other benefits. So this gives you some interesting tactical choices as a fight progresses. How much rage do you want to maintain, or do you want to empty out that salvo and really let loose? Now, all Unleash Rage abilities have a cap. You can only spend up to half of your Barbarian level in Rage to trigger any of these. So there's a cap on how high this scales. So at level 1, you're only adding an extra d6 to an attack if you spend 1 Rage. You can't spend it all at once. So it's trying to balance it a little bit, but like I said, we'll have to refine this over time. At level 2, the Barbarian gets a new way to unleash their rage called Mighty Throw. So I know all the Barbarian players out there probably have those frustrating moments where they just have to pick up a javelin or a hand axe and just toss it, and it doesn't feel great, or something's kind of far away, and it's just not a fun feeling to not have an option there. So Mighty Throw lets the Barbarian pick up something heavy. You know, they pick up a wagon or a big rock or a corpse, and they just hurl it at something for a decent chunk of damage based on the amount of rage they spend. So it starts off being about the same as throwing a hand axe at level 2, but as their rage cap goes up, they're able to throw these big hits if they have the rage to do it. It's just giving them a fun tool. Alternatively, they can use this ability to throw an ally, which, you know, the fastball special is so great, so they could pick up somebody and hurl them at an enemy to try to give them extra mobility, just giving the Barbarian something that a lot of tables let you do, right? A good DM is going to let the Barbarian throw their halfling friend because it's rad, but this hard codes it into the game and gives it a specific use for the Barbarian. So there's no arguing with a DM whether or not the human fighter could be thrown by the Barbarian 30 feet away. Just the ability will specify how that works. So in D&D 2024, at 3rd level, the Barbarian gets an ability where, while raging, they can use their strength score instead of whatever normal attribute is used for a limited list of skill tests. And I like the flavor behind that. I think it's neat, gives the Barbarian some utility, but I didn't like that it was tied to usage of rage. So my rework of this involves just picking a few skills during a short rest to then scale with strength instead of the normal attribute. Now, I also didn't limit this by a certain list of skills. It doesn't have to be a Barbarian skill, it could be anything. Because you know what? The Barbarian has so little utility. I thought, you know, if the Barbarian wants to pick Arcana as a skill, the Primal Spirits will fill them with strength, and they'll use their strength score for Arcana checks until they rest again. You know what? Why not? Barbarian needs it. So at level 5, the Barbarian gets fast movement, and I only made a tiny tweak to this. I just added the ability to unleash 1 rage to dash as a bonus action. It's just another little tool in the Barbarian's toolkit that I thought would be fun. Nothing fancy here. Alright, at level 9, the Barbarian gets a Warcry. Now, I might be a huge fan of Diablo 2 and Path of Exile, and Warcries are absolutely something in those games, so I just thought it would be neat for the Barbarian to have something like that. So Warcry lets them expend rage to grant their allies a powerful but temporary buff. It just lasts for a round, and it allows the Barbarian to do something to help their friends. I just imagine the Barbarian leading the charge into a fight by using this Warcry. And now that they have a Warcry built into the core class, I can actually tie in other subclasses to this ability, which we'll see in a little bit. At level 11, the Barbarian gets Relentlessness, which is a rework of Relentless Rage. So the way Relentless Rage used to work is while raging and you'd be reduced to 0 hit points, you can make a con save to not be reduced to 0 hit points to gain some health back. My change to it is very slight. You don't have to be raging, because that's not something you actually trigger anymore. It's just any time that you would be reduced to 0 hit points, this triggers. But you can expend rage to gain bonuses on the Constitution saving throw. So it's definitely stronger while raging, but it's not something you have to be raging to activate, because that's not a structure anymore in this reworked Barbarian. At level 13, I gave the Barbarian a powerful mobility option called Furious Leap. So it lets them leap through the air at a great distance, going way faster than their movement speed would be able to let them move. That's fine. And when they land with just a crashing thunder, knocking enemies away and knocking them prone, and it's just this really cool, dramatic attack. And it does damage as well. So using this wouldn't make them feel like they've wasted their action. And I've also allowed it to work with extra attack. So it is considered an attack action, so you can use it and then continue with your second attack if you need to, or it could be the second attack in your 2-attack chain. At level 15, we've got Endless Rage, and again, it's just a little bit tweaked from the way this worked before. Now, when you roll initiative, you gain your maximum rage die value in rage. You don't roll it anymore. You just start off fully amped, ready to go. It's level 15, you're in the upper tiers of the game now. The Barbarian should start off a fight, boom, ready to smash. Now at level 17, I've given the Barbarian a new Unleash Rage attack, and it's called Rage Against the World. It gives you Army Breaker. And I thought, I like the idea of a Barbarian being able to whirlwind through a horde of enemies at this level. I mean, level 17, we're almost at the cap of the game, and I just imagine a Barbarian shrugging off endless blows from all these swords and spears while cleaving through enemies, just like Sauron through the human and elven forces at the start of Lord of the Rings. So this is a big attack that extends the Barbarian's reach and does a bunch of extra damage. So it's just a huge Unleash Rage option. So they should just be this walking army breaker of a machine at this level, and I just think that's super badass. And there's an additional passive benefit with Rage Against the World, which is if the Barbarian starts their turn adjacent to at least 3 enemies, that they gain some more rage too. So they'll just be this constant fuel of rage while they're fighting outnumbered. So I made a tiny tweak to the capstone for the Barbarian. I like the capstone for the Barbarian is that their body is pushed beyond the normal limits with a huge strength and constitution score, but at the same time, it doesn't really change anything about the Barbarian in a substantive way apart from making numbers go up at level 20. And I like when the capstones feel aspirational. Like you'll look at that and think, oh man, if I had that ability, it would be so cool. The stuff I could do with that would be awesome. It makes your imagination go. So I tacked on an extra little benefit, which is at the start of the Barbarian's turn, they roll their rage die and gain that much rage. This would make them just absolutely overpowered in a fight, and that's okay. It's level 20. The clerics are moving mountains at this point. The wizards are casting Wish every day. Let the Barbarian just go nuts in a fight. Why not? It's level 20. All right, I went ahead and reworked all 4 of the primal paths that are in the D&D 2024 Player's Handbook. I wasn't planning on doing this originally, but I was just on a roll. I was having a lot of fun. So let's dig into all the subclasses now, which I've reworked to use this new rage mechanic. So the Berserker has always been positioned as the simplest of the subclasses of the Barbarian, I feel. It's meant to just be, you rage better, and you're just good at that. So I've smoothed out some edges on the Berserker and changed the way that they go into a frenzy. So now, if you have at least 4 rage, you are in a frenzy. And while in a frenzy, you gain various benefits, one of which is if you would roll your rage die while in a frenzy, you instead gain the maximum amount that would be. So if you're using Furious Strikes, you would just gain the flat amount of extra damage rather than having to roll it. Additionally, while in a frenzy, the first rage you unleash each turn is free. You don't actually expend the rage. It's still capped based on your rage maximum, but it lets the Barbarian get to higher rage and then stay there more easily, kind of making it a little easier on the player to stay tanky and do some damage. It's fairly straightforward. But now that we have this new condition that they can be in a frenzy, we can key some of the other abilities in the subclass off that. So I've only slightly tweaked Mindless Rage. I think it's a little better like this. So before, it was while raging, you were immune to certain status effects. So I've changed that to while you're in a frenzy, you are immune to these status effects. And if you start your turn affected by those status effects, because maybe you're not in a frenzy yet, you gain a bunch of rage and just flip out and then become immune to them and go nuts. The idea is that a Berserker is not the kind of character you want to mess with the mind of. You mess with a Berserker's mind, and they are going to flip out and tear you in half. And I just think that is so Berserker of them. So I haven't made any changes to how retaliation works from the PHB 2024, so that one's good to go. I think it's solid. So in D&D 2024, the Intimidating Presence is an attack you make, basically. You make this big fear attack against nearby enemies, and, it makes them frightened of you. And I do think that's very cool. I like the idea of the Berserker being scary in a fight. I'm just not a huge fan of that implementation, because it's a once per rest thing, and you have to expend another use of rage to trigger it again, so I've totally reworked this Intimidating Presence. So firstly, I've made it so the Barbarian just always can use their strength score to intimidate, just all the time, because that's cool. And the main change here, though, is while they are in a frenzy, nearby enemies are frightened of the Barbarian. No ability usage, no trigger, no action economy, no recharge, just while they're in a frenzy, they are terrifying to behold. And I think that's way cooler, that they are just this terrifying entity wading through battle. It makes me think of the Northmen and some of the sequences in that, where, they're just charging through this fight and people run in fear. Way cooler, and it's not something they have to trigger to use. So the World Tree Barbarian is a little newer, right? It was in one of the Splat books in 5th edition, now they printed it officially in 5.5. And I didn't do a ton to change this. I've mostly just reworked its abilities to now use Rage to activate. So I don't really need to go through each of these individually, but first of all, now that the Barbarian has their own access to temporary hit points, the first ability from the World Tree doesn't need to grant them that. Instead, it makes it so when they use their Endless Endurance, they gain the maximum benefit. And they have the option to instead grant those temporary hit points to a nearby ally. And the rest of the World Tree is just roughly the same, reworked a little bit, using Rage now, rather than while in a Rage. So I'm not going to go individually through it, just check it out when you look through the document. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, Path of the Wild Heart, the totemic barbarian, I've always had a really big problem with, because Bear Totem was just so darn strong that it really overshadowed all the others. Now, I know there's really cool use cases for the others and their utility, like the movement speed and the flight and the advantage, but I also felt like you're missing out on so much by not having the Bear Totem. And they tried to balance that a little better in D&D 2024, but I still feel like the class has some problems. So I've done a pretty significant rework of the mechanics, but not the flavor here. So all of those totemic spirit options that you would choose when you rage in the D&D 2024 version have been switched to these stances. And now the way this works is a little bit like the way rage used to work before this rework. As a bonus action, you expend one rage to enter one of these totemic stances. So you've got your bear, eagle, and your wolf, and you gain benefits while in them. Now, if you use a bonus action and spend rage, you can switch to a different one, allowing the barbarian to be more adaptable in a fight, being able to switch between adopting these spirit totems as the needs arise. Now, Eagle and Wolf are basically unchanged from what they were in D&D 24 Player's Handbook, but Bear has been significantly changed. Now that the baseline Barbarian isn't gaining damage reduction to only the physical stats as resistance, the Bear Totem doesn't really make any sense. So I've changed it to be more of a Protector-style totem. It allows you to take hits for your friends while you're next to them, which I think is more interesting than just enhancing the damage reduction you have from your baseline class. So now it's a more tactical choice to enter Bear Stance as a big bear-like protector. Now, Animal Speaker and Aspect of the Wilds are unchanged. Those I think were pretty cool already. They're mostly ribbon abilities, and that's okay because the core totemic stances are just so strong, they don't really need a power boost at these other levels. So in D&D 2024, at level 14, you gain new stance options that you can be adopting, right? It's other totems you can use, and that's very cool. I like some of the functionality of those, but I didn't feel like it integrated well with the core flow of the character. So when this rework, now what it does is just enhances those stances you get at level 3, making them dramatically more powerful. The bear totem stance is even better at protecting its allies, giving enemies disadvantage to hit them. Eagle is going to let you just fly all the time now, and Wolf lets you knock things prone. So it stays in line with how they were in D&D 2024, but it's folding them more into the core experience of this subclass, which I think smooths it out a little bit. So the Path of the Zealot I always thought was super cool. I love the Divine Barbarian, and I didn't have to make a ton of changes to this, but I definitely had to smooth some things out as some of its abilities just didn't cohere with the way I reworked the Barbarian. I'm not a fan of a subclass just like arbitrarily adding an extra damage die here and there. I think that's just weird and it's uninteresting, even if it is decent for scaling. So let me dig into what I changed on the Zealot. So Warrior of the Gods, that's unchanged from the way it is in the PHB 2024. So moving on from that, Divine Strikes has been changed. You don't gain an extra d6 or of Radiant or Necrotic damage. Instead, when you use Furious Strikes, the core Barbarian ability, you are not capped in the same way as other Barbarians. Normally you can only spend half of your Barbarian level in Rage per hit. Now instead, the Zealot can spend their full level in Rage per hit. This is because that changes the paradigm, the approach that the Zealot has. The Zealot wants to build up a lot of Rage and then unleash it all at once in one huge hit. And that makes them different from something like the Berserker, which attempts to maintain a high level of Rage steadily. The Zealot is all one big blast. And they can also change the damage type of the attack when they use Furious Strikes to be Radiant or Necrotic, because that's just cool. So Fanatical Focus was already kind of cool. I just needed to tweak it a bit because, Rage works differently. So now you just gain a flat bonus to your mental saving throws equal to half your rage, your current rage. This makes it so the Zealot is harder to affect with those mental things if they maintain high rage. This creates a push and pull for the Zealot that is, I think, going to be interesting. Because the Zealot can empty their rage faster than most barbarians, they're going to have to make a choice between building up these defenses and then getting ready to unleash a huge Furious Strike. So I think that'll create some interesting tactical play for Zealot barbarians. At level 10, the Zealous presence is totally reworked because baseline Warcry helps saving throws for the allies. So now the Warcry ability for Zealots also makes them do increased damage. Their allies will also hit harder while under the effects of the Warcry. So this makes the Zealot Barbarian one of the better leaders of the Barbarian subclasses, because that means they could be leading an army and do a Warcry and all their army is going to do increased damage temporarily, right? I think that's really neat. It lets them create this very big swingy turn for their team as they lead the charge. So Rage of the Gods at level 14 is basically unchanged. Really all I did was give it a big rage cost because it was meant to be a very powerful and dramatic ability that you can only use temporarily. So I've just given it a big rage cost and kept it basically the same. I'm not sure how balanced this is under the new Barbarian. It might be too overpowered to give it those resistances, but I don't know, might be fine. It's level 14. You'll have to playtest it and let me know. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, thanks for watching so far. We're about to dig into a brand new subclass that I created for the Barbarian using this new Rage paradigm. Now, if you haven't already liked and subscribed, please do. It really helps out the channel, is really helping get the word out. And hey, if you want to try to support us, we have a Patreon page. It helps support the creatives behind the scenes who do the editing and artwork for the channel and the Tales from Elsewhere games. Really helps us out if you could do that. If not, it's all good. Let's dive into the Grovekeeper Barbarian. So, what is a Grovekeeper? So I imagine that while the druids are meditating and sleeping or in hibernation, somebody has to watch over the grove. So Grovekeeper Barbarians are the guardians of sacred groves of the world. So they're empowered with primal druidic magic, and they are given abilities that help them watch over their allies better. Their symbol is the Ouroboros. It's the snake eating its own tail, as mechanically speaking, they draw power from the ley lines of the world to feed their rage, and this magic suffuses them, and it lets them use rage to gain magic and magic to gain rage, creating a cycle of power within them that is kind of unique, I think, and maybe a little overpowered, but that's okay. Let's take a look in greater detail here. So, the Grovekeeper follows a similar structure as the Eldritch Knight or Arcane Trickster. It's giving barbarians access to magic as a 1/3 caster class. So the first thing they get is spellcasting, and this follows the same structure as an Eldritch Knight or Arcane Trickster. They're picking from the Druid spell list, they're using Wisdom to cast their spells, yada yada yada. Just take a look at the chart, it all scales the same way. Part of the Barbarian rework was to allow barbarians to multi-class into spellcasting classes a little bit more easily. So instead of preventing spellcasting and concentration, now you just lose all of your rage when you cast a spell. But the Grovekeeper barbarian gets to avoid that penalty. The Leyline Strength feature at level 3 says you no longer lose your rage when you cast a spell. Awesome, now they can mix in their magic during combat. But more importantly, they can spend a bonus action to expend a spell slot and gain an amount of rage equal double the spell slot's level. So they can use their magical energy to fuel their rage. And when they do this, all of their attacks temporarily can be switched to an elemental damage instead of physical, which, the classic druid elements, you have your fire, lightning, and cold, right? They can empower their melee attacks when they're fueled with their magic to deal elemental damage, which is super cool. And maybe overpowered if they can generate too much rage with this. We'll have to test the numbers here. So at level 6, they get Vigilant Watcher, which is a little bit of a ribbon ability. It gives them super dark vision, so they can watch over the groves at night. And it makes it so while they're resting, they can still be on patrol. They basically sleep on their feet. They are the ever vigilant knights that protect the grove. And so their level 6 feature doesn't have a ton of pizzazz to it, but it really reinforces they will watch over the party as they sleep, which is just really flavorful and kind of cool. They have so much power in their spell casting and their Leyline Strength feature that their level 6 feature didn't need to increase their power significantly. At level 10, they get Stoke the Fire, which is starting to feed into this ever-burning cycle that they're going to be able to generate. So whenever they cast a spell, they gain an amount of rage equal to that spell's level. So, they're not casting really high-level spells, because they're a quarter caster or whatever it's called, a third caster. But this does let them mix in magic and gain rage and then spend rage, right? It just creates this cool cycle. Again, might be a little too powerful, I'm not sure, but it is super cool. At level 14, we get the Ouroboros, and this is the cycle complete within the Barbarian. They may now spend rage to cast spells, and that's just super cool. And if they do this, they can cast that spell as part of their attack action, replacing one of their 2 attacks from extra attack. So now the Barbarian is fueling magic, which fuels their rage, which can fuel more magic, and they can just create this really cool cycle of power in a fight if they can keep this all going. Now, it's worth noting that Stoke the Fire doesn't trigger unless you're spending a spell slot to cast the spell. So they don't, go infinite or anything like that here. But in a fight, as they're taking damage and generating more and more rage, they just get this continual access to their spells. And the Druid spell list isn't super overpowered. It's not like they're going to be casting Fireball endlessly here, but this is probably too strong a feature at level 14, I fully admit. I think it would need to be tweaked to maybe you have to spend double the rage of the spell slot, maybe. I'm not sure. That would require playtesting, but I think the evocation that this Ouroboros feature hits is spot on for an endless cycle of magical rage. Whew. That was a marathon of a video, right? I hope you stuck it out all through it. I'd love to know your feedback on this. Like I said, some of this is probably overpowered overall, all these Barbarian tweaks, but I think it's super cool. I'm hopefully going to have a chance to test this out myself at one point, but if any of you get a chance to run this Barbarian, hopefully from level 1, definitely let us know. Join the Tales from Elsewhere Discord down below and come talk to us about it. I think it'd be a lot of fun. So if you are watching this video around its release, I hope you have a good holiday season with your family and a good new year, and I will catch you all in 2025.